En route to their Flashpoint 2 season title, Virtus.pro beat Cloud9, Big, Fnatic and OG, a list of the favourites for many coming into the event, and there is no disputing that Jame, Yakindar and company beat every team put in front of them when it mattered most. So now, with their trophy in hand, or at least soon to be in hand once it gets posted, we need to question where VP can improve and what is their theoretical peak moving on from here. The first topic I want to discuss is kind of my expectations of Virtus.pro coming into the tournament and how that differed from how they were playing here at Flashpoint, and particularly going into kind of the playoffs of this tournament. So initially, whilst I was prepping on VP and watching their games, I was watching them playing in the CIS region. I think it was IM New York CIS, the main one I was watching. And during this tournament, there was no doubting kind of the individual skill on a team like Virtus.pro with players like Buster and Yakindar and Jame as well, just from an individual basis, is a very strong player, very strong mechanics, all of these sort of things. So from the outset, it was quite clear. And even a player like Kickit, for example, for the roles he plays and space he gives to other players, he's still a very skilled player and he can still, win rounds and have great halves on his own from a kind of an individual basis. So just on an individual level, it was obvious that this team had some serious firepower and probably quite a lot more than a lot of people expected. But a big takeaway from watching this team coming into Flashpoint was that they were playing very loose. They're giving individuals a lot of space. And even though they took series off Forza and they took 2 series, I think, of Na'Vi on their route to winning that tournament, it was quite obvious to me that Na'Vi wasn't playing at their top level and that Virtus.pro were playing super loose. They were giving a lot of space to individuals and it wasn't going to be repeatable, in my eyes, coming into a tournament like Flashpoint when you're hitting the top level teams. So we knew they had good individual skills, we knew they had some structure and some of it was working, but I had concerns about them playing too loose and the individuals maybe getting a bit ahead of themselves, players like Kinder and Buster. So coming into Flashpoint and throughout Flashpoint, I think the amount they improved as a team in some of these aspects was really incredible. And by the end, it was much harder to have these same criticisms of a team. And we'll talk about this much more as we go through this video. But the amount they learnt whilst playing here, the amount they would have practiced was really, really incredible. And I think it's a great reason why tournaments like Flashpoint are really great, because we have a whole month of games where they are spread out with 3-4 days between each team's games. They have time, apart from the playoffs, where they have time to improve, they have time to think about their map pool, they have time to bring new maps in, all of these aspects. And by the end, we can see a very good progression, a very good storyline, even from an analytical sense, of how the team has improved throughout the tournament. And maybe in the current day, we've got such a mix of tournaments and some of them are short, some of them are longer. We don't always get to see that with teams. And that was just a big kind of bright spot in general with Flashpoint. And I'm guessing kind of for Flashpoint as a brand and as a tournament organizer, this is something they're really aiming for, is to have these really great storylines in tournament. And then, you got all the content around the teams as well. And all these sort of aspects where we can build the storylines throughout the tournament and kind of have a really kind of closed package about how you think about each team at a Flashpoint. So the first thing we should talk about in terms of how VP can improve moving forward is their map pool and their veto. So firstly, with their map pool, the depth of their map pool improved significantly over the tournament here. We had maps like Vertigo, Overpass, Train, Dust 2. Any of these maps improved significantly from day one to the end. And at the beginning of the tournament, it was a very top-heavy map pool with maps like Inferno and maybe Mirage and these sort of maps. And by the end of the tournament, it was much less top-heavy and they had a lot more options of where they could go in the veto stages. Now, moving into talking about the vetoes themselves, I think this is an example of a team that has quite a poor self-awareness of their own map pool. And it might be a consequence of them being so kind of inexperienced in this level of competition. It might be in scrims on certain maps, they're performing much better than we saw on the server. But in so many occasions, I was perplexed by their vetoes, and it kind of bore out when they were losing a lot of their map picks in the playoffs. And obviously, that just really shouldn't be happening. You could say a few of them could just be coincidence, but the amount of map picks they were losing indicates they've got a problem with their veto. And if you want a more concrete example, when they played Fnatic in the upper bracket final, that was probably the most surprising veto I've heard for a long time, where they refused to float Nuke. Fnatic permabans Nuke right now. They have played Nuke with this team, but Fnatic was not a risk to pick into Nuke unless it was literally a case that VP had nothing on Nuke. If they had defaults, if they had some CT setups, they should have floated it and risked it. I think they should have banned Overpass. They did win Overpass in this series, but irrespective, even with hindsight, I still would have banned Overpass going into that match. I wouldn't have played it against Fnatic. So let Vertigo in, let Overpass in. They didn't float Nuke. They didn't ban anything else that they could have banned. And then they picked into Vertigo versus Fnatic, a map where it might have even been the day before. They got, maybe it was 2 days before, they got smashed by Big and they had a terrible CT side. And then on the flip side, Fnatic looked great against MIBR, potentially the best Vertigo team in this tournament. So it made no sense. Maybe they prepped on Fnatic and thought it was a great pick, but it didn't work. They lost the map. And that's one, with hindsight, it looks like an even worse choice. But throughout this whole veto, and they let the third map go to Train when I think they should let it go to Mirage, the whole veto was really odd. They did win the series, but it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think moving forwards, having a better self-awareness of their map pool is kind of a, maybe win condition is the wrong word. It's definitely a condition for them to get a lot better. And they need to get on top of this map pool. And if you're part of your own team or you just like watching CS or whatever, you want to think more about map pools, forget about just base your map pool off what you see in officials. Use the eye test. Even if you're good on a map in scrims, it won't necessarily translate, and that's maybe where you see a disconnect between what analysts are saying teams should pick into or veto out and what's actually happening in the vetoes. So for Virtus.pro, that would be my recommendation, is base it much more on officials, and then just, vetoing doesn't have to be complicated. You just have to compare your maps to your opponents. The ones where you're weakest versus your opponents, you'll ban. The ones you're strongest versus your opponents, you pick into and you try to have as the decider. And stop trying to think about your map pool just in isolation. Always compare it to the other team. And vetoing doesn't have to be complicated, and people overcomplicate it way too much when you just need to make the logical pick. Sometimes you could flex it a bit when you want to pick into a bit of a left field map where they wouldn't have practiced, but for a team like Virtus.pro, let's learn the rules of vetoing. Let's learn how to get good vetoes and have free maps where they stand a good chance. And then we'll start breaking the rules down the line when we need to, beat really top teams and we need to blindside them with maps. Because right now they don't need to. And it'll be an instant upgrade for the team if they just sorted out these vetoes. So that's the first one. And that should be quite an easy fix. I hope they can get on top of that. The next thing to talk about is Jame on the CT side. So with Jame as a player, something that people underrate a lot with Jame is his quality of his fundamentals and his kind of decision making. He's very good at rotating in at the right times. He's very good at staying alive. He's very good at not giving away opening picks. And all of these aspects for his experience, which isn't that good actually, compared in terms of top international competition. He's played for a while, but for his experience, his fundamentals are really very good. And consider the fact that Jame has probably never played under a great in-game leader. He's probably never played under great coaches. At least I'm talking relative to the top teams in the world. In that sense, not great coaches, maybe good coaches for his region, for what they had available. But he's probably never been taught these fundamentals. He almost certainly had to learn them himself, and that makes it really, really impressive. But with Jame, we need to see him being more mobile during the early round on CT side. And throughout this tournament here at Flashpoint, we had players like Nifty, like Hulzerk, great examples of players who late round maybe could, particularly with someone like Nifty, late round versus the executes, his actual skills were good. He could hit shots, he could get frags. But what we're leaving on the table with players like this is opening picks. We're leaving on the table information. We're leaving kind of a way to throw off your opponents, a way to give them different looks. We're leaving this all on the table, and it would be such an upgrade for Virtus.pro if they could get Jame being more proactive. Look at a team like MIBR, look at what KNG was able to do when he moved into being an in-game leader and he got full control, full space, and he could do whatever he liked on the CT side. On certain maps, he could destroy other teams just individually, opening up so many rounds, putting them so many 5-on-4s. And Jame has the skills to be a player like this. Obviously, it might take quite a while for him to get more aggressive and more proactive, but the theoretical peak of a player like Jame, if he could figure out these aspects when we already know his fundamentals are very, very good, is insane. And I'm not sure whether this is on Jame, it could be on their coach, I think it's Dazdan. Both of them together need to figure this out. Maybe even this is an aspect where even like a GM figure could you don't need to be a hardcore coach to fix this. You just need to kind of change the overall direction of the team a little bit more and get Jame being more proactive and giving himself more space on CT. That would be an instant upgrade. And the other player we need to talk about on the CT side is Yakindar. So Yakindar is given pretty much all the good spots on every single map. And Yakindar as a player is someone that, in terms of having like, I don't want to call them solo plays because that will make it sound really bad, but maybe solo plays is the only word I can think of, where he has like solo play options on the CT side that he can go into and he can get a lot of frags off them. So a good example would be he likes playing this off angle on Mirage under window. I'm not sure if I can explain it that well. Maybe I'll show you in game, maybe not in game, but I'll show you here quickly. So he's playing an off angle here below window, and then you have the T side throws their top mid smoke to default out like this, and then he would smoke bottom con, and then he'd play like there's an angle here up the side of the between the smokes, which is really hard to deal with. It's a spot I've never seen before, and this is just like a great example of what Yakindar can bring. And he used this in a game versus OG in the group final, and he got probably 3 or 4 rounds. He opened up the rounds just from playing this spot. And even though this probably wouldn't be repeatable, this is a great example of what a player like Yakindar can bring on the CT side and how he can open up rounds when potentially a player like Jame, who could, if he was playing in a certain manner, open up a lot of rounds. We have got another option of another player that can get us openings. So that's where kind of Yakindar in my eyes shines the most, particularly on the CT side, is in these aspects of kind of having good opening options for himself and then playing around them. But what I want to see from Virtus.pro with Yakindar is I want to see more set options for how to use him, or more set kind of aggressive plays on CT, more setups, more structure around his solo plays or his solo options or stuff like this. Or maybe you build aggressions or setups with Yakindar in mind, because even with that example there of how he's playing under window, even in that game, they were not playing that well around him, and it was more Yakindar playing solo, and he didn't have his teammates around him to support him. And that's how you could elevate these sort of solo plays to the next level, is when you had, if you had like really great setups, really great aggressions around Yakindar. This is when we're getting like a really high level of play. If you can get this figured out and you can have good options that you can drop in and out of, where you're using Yakindar's kind of individual skill or his natural strengths in these areas, but we're still having a good team focus, we're still having good calling, we're still having good options to fall back on, we're still having a backup plan if whatever he goes for doesn't work, because that's the main problem with these kind of individual plays at the moment on some maps, on some sides, is that there's very little trade potential and there's very little, like if Yakindar gets isolated by the T side, he's dead and they're in a 4 and 5 and they're probably going to lose the round. So that's the main thing I want to see from Yakindar. And this is a bit of a tangential topic, but in general here at Flashpoint, I've been very careful to criticize individuals for making mistakes like that, because in my eyes, that is the coach and the in-game leader needs to get on top of this and figure out how to use these strengths better. And Yakindar clearly has the skills. He likes going for these kind of aggressive plays. Let's put more structure around him. It's not Yakindar's fault that the team isn't playing so well around him, especially when he's so inexperienced at this level. Everyone else needs to come around him and have good setups. So those for me, Jame and Yakindar, and playing around them better on CT is an fairly fast. It might take a bit of time. With Jame, I think he could correct it quite quickly if he just had kind of a whole change in kind of philosophy on the game. Obviously, there's no guarantee he's going to change that, or it might take ages, but I don't think it would be out of the question that in a few months, Jame could transform himself as a player on the CT side if he understood what he needed to change, and maybe in terms of coaching, they got on top of it. So, okay, so let's talk about Virtus.pro on the CT side and how they like to play, and how, as an overall package, we've talked a bit about Jame, a bit about Yakindar, but how as an overall package we can get them to a top 10 level, to a really kind of great level of play. So on the CT side, particularly towards the end of the tournament, Virtus.pro were becoming a much more proactive team. Particularly during the mid-round, they would like to group and push or get aggressive or flash in and get information. So, for example, and I'll jump back in game again here for a second. And I've deleted it. No, it's there. We're good. So, on a map like Mirage, for example, the way they'd like to play is, say, it got late round and they were lacking information. Maybe they'd get all the players back like into these sort of spots, and then maybe someone like Kicker or Sanji would just flash over mid, and they'd peek out and try and get some information on wherever the T's are. So this is just a very simple example of what they like to do. They're just kind of going to group, get a bit aggressive, use some nades, but ultimately they were just kind of trying to force out maybe some fights and force out a bit of information. They were a team that didn't like sitting back passive with no information, which is a great starting point, a great mentality to come in with versus being super passive. But the question is from here, the real skill in doing stuff like this and being proactive and pushing for information, even if you're doing it as a team, the real skill is in calling this stuff at the right time. And this is really, really hard to learn. And this could take them months, maybe even, a year of playing top international competition. And this is an aspect which I suspect will take them quite a long time to fix. But this is how a team that's already being proactive, already has some opening options, already has some aggressions, already has, the mentality to play for information. This is how you go to the next level from where they are now, doing stuff at the right time, getting good reads on the other team, having good communication from your players, saying, I've seen this for the last 3 rounds, this is how they're playing, this is how we're going to counter it. And this is how you elevate beyond where they are now to a level where they can consistently bring themselves back from man down situations. They can consistently, even if having issues with not getting picks early, keep themselves in round because they're playing so much for information. How they can punish teams for being too telegraphed. All of these aspects, they can really ramp it up. And we can see them having more consistency on their CT sides. And yeah, in general in CS, like CT calling and making the decisions is really underrated. People in general just sort of think about T-side calling and trying to have really great reads or punishing rotates, or having great executes. CT calling like this, and it's more of a team effort than the in-game leader, but presumably James is still a very vocal player in these sort of decisions. These aspects are very, very important, very hard to teach players, and this is really when you start separating the top 5 teams in the world from the rest, is very high-level CT calling, reading the opponent, adjusting, knowing when to go for the info place. So, complicated topic. Hope they can get on top of it. I'm jumping onto the T side. Roughly the same thing, I think, is where they need to be looking at the most. I think James, to me, still looks a little bit uncomfortable mid-rounding on certain maps. I think Overpass, an example on the T side, where I'm guessing because they just haven't played it so much, he doesn't look that comfortable to me mid-rounding. And I think as a team, they need a little bit of a better mixture of set rounds versus ones where it's more so an individual going for a play, or they're just sort of contacting in on something or running something super simple. I think they need a few more set rounds to kind of complete their T side. And I think as a team, they need to have more aggressive defaults. So this is kind of a way of playing that very much suits a team like Virtus.pro and the skill, the kind of the tool set they have available with the players. So let's jump back on Gnosis again, and I'll explain this one. So on T-side Mirage, so we're not looking at the CT players anymore, forget about them. On T-side Mirage, something they were doing before the tournament, something they were doing a bit here, they do something I like to call like fast mid default. Now, I won't explain this too much, but basically when you have a good spawn on one of your players, you're just going to send them fast out mid. It's like knife out running it the whole way. And they have a fast window smoke that lands before this player gets out. So you don't need to understand it too much. What you need to know is that they basically run as fast as they can out mid, and they just go out with numbers and they just try to take fights. And windows normally smoke, so the AWP's not, CT AWP's not a problem. These sort of plays for fast map control and getting aggressive and like just sending a player like Yakinda or Buster out, or even players like Sanji and Kicker, they can still do it themselves if they got the spawns. Sending players like this out aggressively where they can just sort of force out their numbers and just get trades into the CTs, and a player like Yakinda will open up some rounds if he gets good opportunities to take fights. this is a perfect way for a team like Virtus.pro to be playing. And I think on some maps, they've got some good options, but this is like an aspect of the game on the T side where I would ramp this up to the max with this team. On every map, every opportunity you have to run fast defaults like these, where maybe you can abuse spawns and get out in front of where, get in a position where you can fight CTs well. Pretty much every map, I'd have 2 or 3 options like this, and I just run them all day long if I was calling for this team, because I think it suits them really, really well. And kind of a similar topic to this is, I think they're a team that benefit a lot from running kind of super explosive plays off defaults when they were like well grouped. So on T side Inferno, bit of a mess. They like running B pops. A lot of teams do. A lot of teams here did. So you just you default out for map control, and then like this, maybe 4 here, 1 here, and then you'd group B, and then you just pop in with like CT smoke on the fly and some entry flashes over the beyond first oranges. And it doesn't matter. This is something they like to run. This is like a really simple example of how you could be explosive off the defaults, and just you don't have to do so much mid rounding. You just get aggressive, send the numbers in, send in entries like Buster and Yukinda, and try and open up rounds. And then on Mirage, I think a good example here on Mirage, let's say they're defaulting out again. Made a real mess of this one. Like this, so they go 4 mid like this or something. This is like a very realistic round for a team like Virtus.pro. Let's say even that they fast mid defaulted, like we just talked about. So they went top spawns with just a window smoke and they got out. So from here, a great round for them would just be re-smoking window and top connector, getting connector control, maybe molly short or something, just take it out of the game. And then you have these 3 players in here, and then all you do is you pop out of the top connector smoke like this. You flash over the top, and then as this smoke fades, you come through with 3 players and you try and entry the site. We saw this a bit here at Flashpoint. They did run around like this. But this is the sort of thing that would work super well for this team, and it would make James' life a lot easier, because if you run around like this, there is still nuance. You can still like call it at really great times, but just being super explosive and just getting out with numbers and sending the entries in, and there's not so much slow play, there's not so much mid rounding, there's not so much dependence on comms. It's more like let's brute force this out, let's try and force good fights, and let's put them under serious pressure, because we have good aimers, we have good players, we're good at trading. They are a team that's quite good at trading when they understand how to group well. So instantly, that's a way that I could see them playing super well on T side. That's what I want to see, is more stuff like that. Yep, I think that's T side. So kind of one of the final topics I want to talk about is like team fundamentals. So you have individual fundamentals, which is like knowing when to play for information, good team play, understanding aggression versus being too passive, and how much you can get away with, and using your nades well. These are all kind of fundamentals. When I'm talking about team fundamentals, this is playing man up, this is playing man down, this is mid-round calling, this is communication. All these kind of intangibles that someone that wasn't so experienced watching the game wouldn't see, but these decide a lot of rounds, and they're very important aspects of the game. For a team like Virtus.pro that hasn't played so much kind of top international competition, and potentially from a region where other teams don't have such great fundamentals, I think they have quite a long way to go in this area. And this is potentially somewhere where, although it won't be immediately obvious that it's getting better, fixing their team fundamentals, getting their comms up to scratch, particularly playing man down situations and man up situations better. For a player like Yukinda, for example, I think he needs to learn a lot about playing man up. You can get these under control, they'll just win so many more rounds. They get a high conversion rate on 5 and 4s. They'll get a better chance of giving themselves back in 4 and 5s. They just get super good fundamentals, and it plays into loads of other stuff we've already talked about with CT calling and knowing when to play for information. But in terms of overall their fundamentals, there's a bit of a way to go, but this is an area which they can improve so much. If you want some more kind of solid examples, group final versus OG, they lost that game, and I think they got punished for having some not really bad fundamentals. I think OG played a really good game there, but you could just see how OG had better fundamentals than a team like Virtus.pro, which shouldn't be surprising given Yukinda's inexperience and how little in international competition recently, at least, that VP has seen. So that was one example. They played Mad Lions in the upper bracket quarterfinal. They did win this game, Virtus.pro, but Mad Lions were the better team. Mad Lions threw it on CT side train at the end. In this game, Mad Lions, their players are not as good as Virtus.pro, and it was kind of, in my opinion, fundamentals to let Virtus.pro down in this game, even though they won it. And then Fnatic in the upper bracket final, in the pre-game segment that we kind of had to last minute record, I said that I thought they might get exposed in this game for having bad fundamentals, or not, maybe bad's a bit extreme, but not as good as the top teams in the world. Lacking fully flushed out fundamentals would be the way to say it. In this game, up until like the 20th round of Overpass, I think Fnatic were showing that they had much better team fundamentals than a team like Virtus.pro. And obviously, if you didn't see it, Fnatic, they won the first map quite convincingly. Second map was Overpass. They were up, what was it, 13-7 or something like this. Something like this sort of scoreline where a team like Fnatic should cruise to it, and they just fell apart. They kind of threw the game, and VP came back, and they had a great third map from Virtus.pro. So in that game, I think we did see weaker fundamentals. And in terms of fixing this sort of stuff, this isn't an easy fix. This is mainly just experience and watching back games, seeing what to change, and talking with site partners, talking with teammates, getting, James more experience with calling. There's so many small things. Why kind of group it all into team fundamentals? Because there's just so many small things individually. But let's look at it as a package. There's something they need to work on a lot, and it's going to take a lot of time. And it's going to take more experience, and the more exposure they get to international competition, the better this is going to become. And I think on this topic in particular, so Dazdan, their coach, is someone we need to look at. He's probably on him more than anyone to fix these team fundamentals. And hopefully he surprises me and can get onto this stuff super quick. And, if they can sort this out in the next 6 months, they could really raise their game when on the server. To a lot of people, it wouldn't look that different. But they would just be so much more consistent with these changes. So what is the theoretical peak of Virtus.pro? Can they get into the top 10? And then beyond that, can we start talking really seriously about, is this team going to be top 6, 7, 8 in the world and in contention for top 4s at tournaments and the odd finals, and on their day win them? So I think at the moment, the HLTV ranking is something like 11th or 12th. I think that's quite realistic, maybe even slightly too high. But this is in the right ballpark for sure, around this sort of level. And I think that's very fair. And they've got to do a bit more for me to get into the top 10. And all of these topics we've already talked about, if you fix their vetoes, maybe they are a top 10 team. If you fix their fundamentals a bit, maybe they are a top 10 team. But in terms of can they crack top 6, 7, 8 in the next 6 to 12 months, potentially. They need to fix a lot of their kind of issues, or a lot of areas to work on. They need to get a lot more experience. It is possible, I think, with this lineup. I think this is a lineup where you look at it and I don't think there's a big desire here to make any roster moves or think about any roster moves. You just keep going, you keep working at it. And yeah, I think in my head, I'd say probably about 8th best in the world is going to be the peak of this team, without significant changes or without someone like James really reinventing himself on the CT side. If they fix everything we've already talked about, they could be a top 5, 6 team. And then you've got to really have real discussions about, do we have to break a contract to get a certain player in to round us out? Do we have to get new coaching staff in? I don't want to go too far into it, but if they did get to that point of 6th, 7th, 8th, then you've got to have real discussions about what do they need to change to really go for it and be a super top team. Overall, the big takeaway, I think, for Virtus.pro and everyone that's seen Virtus.pro here is how important exposure to international competition is. And I think it allowed them to reinvent their game a lot, from how they looked coming into this tournament to how they looked at the end of the playoffs. And the overall story for Virtus.pro is so impressive in terms of how they changed so quickly, and it's a really great lesson to other teams, particularly from a region like the CIS region, where perhaps they get stuck in certain mindsets of playing and they're not open to making changes. I think Virtus.pro here were very open to making changes. I think they learned a lot from the international competition. I can imagine that this is a speculation that watching a team like MIBR have good performances kind of showed them a lot about how they could play, because I saw their T-sides in particular change a lot throughout the tournament, getting much more grouping, much more 4-1s, something that MIBR, for example, was doing. So I think the whole exposure to international competition was good. It helped reinvent them, tighten up their game, and really improve. And that would be my main takeaway for Virtus.pro and people watching Virtus.pro and thinking about teams in general, is how much exposure can help. And then you have all the aspects of where Virtus.pro must have been practicing their fucking nuts off in this tournament, coming into it and throughout it. And we've heard some stories about how many hours per day they were playing. I think they're probably all true. I can imagine that during this tournament, they basically slept, woke up, ate, played CS, watched some demos, played CS, ate again, then slept, woke up, played an official. You know, it could really have been like that, and you only get that as a team with serious like monster motivation coming into it. They really wanted it here. They wanted it as much as any other team. It was quite clear to me that teams like Virtus.pro and MIBR here wanted this so much more. And we saw that throughout the playoffs. They improved so quickly, so impressive. And this is a very exciting team moving forward, even though it's quite hard to be totally positive when we're talking about what they went wrong and what they could change. Just in terms of what we'd all would have expected for Virtus.pro coming into the tournament and how they looked at the end, so impressive. I'm very impressed by all the players. Jaime, in terms of his calling, had stepped up so much, and a player like Yakindar, he has some areas to work on, but for someone with his experience, really phenomenal tournament. And you know, the only way is up from here for a player like him. And in 2 and 3 years, who knows where a player like Yakindar could be when he kind of learns more, gets more experience, and sorts out some fundamentals. So overall, Virtus.pro, very impressive. I look forward to seeing them more, and hopefully if they fix even a few of these things we've talked about, you know, they could really start punching with some top teams. So that's been Virtus.pro. We'll do some more videos like this, getting in a good rhythm of them now. Hope you enjoyed that, and yeah, stick around as you get some more content here from the Rona prison.